Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is a wonderful honor for the Hillary Institute to welcome you as the 2020 Hillary Laureate. And we're just delighted that you can be with us.
Well, thank you, Martha. Actually, the honor and the delight is all mine. I'm really very delighted to join the Hillary family. And sadly, we still can't do this in person, but hopefully we can correct that throughout the next 12 months. But in the meantime, I'm delighted to be in conversation with you today.
That's great. And the assembled crowd with us, Christiana, for this is a wonderful group of folks from across sectors, including, of course, Climate Minister James Shaw. So wonderful to have you with us. Obviously, December the 12th, Christiana, is the anniversary of the signing of the Paris Agreement. And some would argue that since then, the world has become, in fact, more divided rather than less so. What can we learn from the sort of multiple crises of 2015 at a time where the heavy lifting is absolutely global in its scope and global in terms of what we need to bring to the table?
Well, you know, I'm a firm believer that it is when we hit rock bottom that we begin to bounce up, and that it is at the moments of deepest darkness that we can actually shine forth the brightest. And so I am, in a strange way, perhaps with some detachment and viewing 2020 more from a historical element rather than being right in 2020. I'm actually quite, and this may surprise you, quite grateful for the lessons that we're learning this year, because we have turned the page on so many different issues. The first one that comes to mind, because you talk about the crises, is I think there is a growing number of people, institutions, corporations, governments that are truly understanding that we have very irresponsibly lived and planned and executed in a siloed way, where we thought that inequality was one silo and ecosystem failure was another silo, and climate change was another silo, and human health was a separate silo, and on and on and on. And I think this year, because of COVID being a zoonotic disease, I believe that we have understood that actually all of those silos were perhaps helpful in analytical purposes to begin to understand the specificity of each of those, but actually that's not the way the reality works. Actually, all of these crises are intimately interlinked. So inequality, climate, ecosystem, health crisis, and the economic crisis that we're now suffering from COVID, they're all intricately interlinked. And what that actually means is that because they are so interlinked and interdependent of each other, we don't necessarily have to address them one by one in a sequential fashion, which is a good thing, because we would run out of time and we would certainly run out of capital if we had to address them individually. We also wouldn't be able to choose which one do we do first, which is a priority. So as these crises have converged upon us in 2020, the only way out is actually to converge the solutions. And we have been speaking about this for months, from, if I remember well, from April, May, we started to realize this. By now, by the end of the year, I think that understanding has normalized. And we are seeing more and more and deeper understanding of the fact that we have to converge all of this. My one data point, but there are many, is the IEA, the International Energy Agency, that has traditionally been a very conservative energy authority, the highest authority on energy in the world. and traditionally very much leaning toward oil and gas and fossil fuels. And this year, they have come out radically saying the recovery packages to COVID have to be clean. They have to be socially inclusive. That is something that I honestly never expected the IEA to come out and say, and they were one of the first ones that came out. And there are many such examples of understanding the intricate relationship between all of these issues and the fact that the recovery plans have to address everything as a package. So I'm actually grateful for that lesson. It's been a very tough year. It's been a very painful year for millions of families that have lost their jobs, their livelihoods, where children have not been able to go to school, where many parents have not been able to know how are they going to feed their children. It's been incredibly painful, to not even mention the lives that we have lost. But it has come as a huge, huge learning. And I am very much praying and hoping that we won't forget those lessons once we come out of the pit of COVID-19.
We are very, very aware of just how fortunate we are down here in terms of COVID per se. Obviously, the leadership of the current administration, Jacinda as Prime Minister, and her cabinet has been seminal to that. What role do you think the regulators need to play in terms of this caucus, as you say, of issues, really? We've just announced a climate emergency here. Minister Shaw with us tonight is just celebrating that. And of course, the commitment, as you know, is federal government leadership with a line in the sand in 2025, not 2050, which I'm sure we're all very pleased about. But let's think about the regulators per se. How seminal is their leadership at this moment? What comes first, chicken or egg?
Both. They both come together, because the thing is, Mark, if we had arrived at this point 20 or 30 years ago, then we could probably sequence things. But the fact is that we have totally run out of time. And so we can no longer afford the luxury of sequencing and saying, well, let's export the responsibility first to governments and regulators who have to design the structures, the incentives, and the punitive measures for decarbonization. And then we will go to the corporate sector, or we will go to the investment sector, or vice versa. Let the corporates take the lead, and then let governments come and buttress that with regulation. The fact is that we need to do both at the same time. So, we need to change the wheels of the airplane in mid-flight because we have run out of time. And that means, of course, that it is more difficult, but it also means that there is opportunity and responsibility for everyone to do their part. No one, whether you are corporate, whether you're in the investment sector, whether you're in local government and central government, no one can say, I'm going to wait, I'm going to wait for Godot. And when Godot does their work, then I will come in. That is just not acceptable anymore. All of us have to.
As we all know, Godot never arrived, did he?
Godot will never arrive, exactly. And so we all have to figure out what is our immediate level of influence, our area of influence, where we are directly responsible for emissions, and how can I change that right away? And then where am I indirectly responsible for emissions, and how can I change that right away? And there are many ways to do that, And all of us are called to do that very honest and sincere examination of the way that we show up in the world, what we're doing and what we're not doing, and actually stand up to the challenge and prove that we can collectively build a very different reality.
Let's look at the financial and the investment picture here. Obviously, I think it's fair to say that a number of people breathed a significant sigh of relief with the Biden-Harris administration coming into play very soon. how significant do you think this moment is? I mean, it's obviously significant, but just how significant is it to have a new administration, a progressive administration in the US at this time when we need to ensure that the direct investment flows are actually heading in the right direction?
I think it's very, very significant. But I should say this is not going to be the start of the shift in the financial sector. The fact is that it is capital markets that have been increasing their concern of the risk of having assets that are highly exposed to climate change. That increasing concern of capital markets has led to the financial sector shifting over to much lower carbon portfolios and assets, because they have understood that there is physical destruction risk, there is value destruction risk, and there is litigation risk. And because of the understanding of that risk, that is why the financial sector has been shifting for several years. Data points. We already have over 100 banks that have already excluded coal. And we know that banks do not go into exclusion lightly. It's a very difficult decision for them to take. But we have over 100 banks in the world that have already excluded coal and are starting to look at oil and gas also for exclusion. 18 central banks around the world are already doing climate stress tests to the national economy. Asset owners, institutional universal investors, 30 institutional investors have come together several years ago already to make a bold commitment to transition their investment portfolios to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 at the latest. They represent $5 trillion in asset under management. And we have a growing number of companies that are actually disclosing where their exposure to climate is, because, and that is a total of $50 trillion in asset under management. That's the supply side of that transparency on risk. The demand side is $160 trillion of capital that is expecting to know where the carbon intensity is. And carbon intensity is risk intensity. Those two things are synonymous with each other. And so we've seen these shifts now for several years. The fact that the United States is now finally coming to climate responsibility will accelerate this, and it will accelerate it certainly at the governmental level, but also for those financial institutions that are headquartered in the United States. So expect, stay tuned to this. I think the financial sector is the one that is going to transition the fastest over the next 12 months, especially because of the push from the new US administration.
Let's take it back down to the domestic level, Christiana. Mom and pop. There's been some really important and in many cases tragic, but nonetheless very salient lessons from the COVID experience this year in terms of behavior change. So I remember Jeremy and I discussing this many times, and Mike Broom, similarly, your fellow laureates, about the biggest battle we have is that people feeling this is all too hard. What role, what mom and pop role, what citizen-led role can we now ensure as part of the acceleration?
Well, we tend to think that that we as individuals are too small to do anything about this, but that's not the way to think about it. I tend to think about climate change as a team sport, and in team sports, every individual player is key. No individual player can win the game, but
play well with others. Yes, play well with others.
Play well with others and excel at the role that you're playing in that team. The roles are different, but as a whole and collectively, they are actually not just complementary, but they're actually embrace the entire reality. So that is the attitude that we have to have as individuals. We tend to forget that demand shifts are actually very powerful levers of change for corporations. When demand changes, which it is already, when the public expects corporations to not just cease from doing damage, but rather actively engage in solving social and environmental problems, which is where we are right now, then corporations begin to move forward into that space. They begin to decarbonize, they begin to actively contribute to the solution space because their customers are expecting that. When we as individuals, democracies are frankly nothing less than the sum total of all of the voters. That is customer expectation. That is voter expectation. In New Zealand, a beautiful example, right? Jacinda Ardern has been re-elected because of expectation of responsible leadership on the part of voters. If voters expected something else and wanted something else, we would have had a different result. Every vote counts. And we vote with our wallet, we vote with our feet, we vote with our paper votes or electronic votes. Every single individual has a huge possibility to make clear what they are expecting from their corporate leaders, from their financial sector leaders, from their political leaders. And in as much as we do that, they will react. They will begin, in fact, even not just to react to what we want now, they will begin to anticipate where they see that that customer, voter, or investor expectation is moving in the future, because all responsible institutions and companies want to anticipate demand where it's going to be tomorrow. But we have to set the direction. Once we as individuals set the direction, you will see the rest of society actually anticipate 2 or 3 steps down the line of that same direction. And then you create this virtuous cycle in which there is increasing demand for responsibility and increasing provision or supply of that kind of responsibility.
Take us forward, Christiana. You and Tom have just written this remarkable book, The Future We Choose, placing ourselves not in a futuristic scenario 50 years out, but 10 years out. You talk a lot about the stubborn optimism. Let's be frank, the lift ahead is a journey requiring enormous tenacity. You referred to stubborn optimism. I've been accused of talking about militant optimism. What role, what do you mean by that? And go ahead.
Yeah. No, I would be delighted to know what you mean by militant optimism, Mark. I don't use the word militant because we don't have a military in Costa Rica, so I tend to shy away from that word. But I kind of
credit to your father, in fact. Yes.
Indeed. But I kind of suspect that that we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about gritty, determined optimism. And for me, optimism is a choice. It is the responsible choice that we have to make every day. It's not that we wake up and read the news, and if we have good news, then we're optimistic, and if we have bad news, then we're fatalistic or pessimistic. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the choice that we have to make every single day to be fully aware of the reality that we see, so not be blind to it, and at the same time, be fully conscious of and embody the conviction that no matter what is happening out there, we do have the ingenuity, and we have the innovative capacity and the determination to change that reality for the better. And we know that that determined, gritty optimism is the only thing that has really made a difference and that has made major changes. Think of, the major change makers in this world. Think of Gandhi, think of JF Kennedy, think, all of these big leaders, they were just stubbornly optimistic about the reality that they wanted to see, the reality that they wanted to create. We have to do the same. We can't just accept other reality.
And be fearless about the difficult conversations as well. I mean, reflecting our own echo chambers is all very well, but it's not going to change anything.
But Mark, tell me what you mean by militant optimism.
Well, it refers to that, what I've just said, really, Christiana. It's the what I call the conversations that matter, the readiness to reach across the aisle and actually have those difficult conversations in the full knowledge that you're not talking to people who immediately agree with you, who are going to come along and be enthused in this ride, but finding the resonant chord, the emotional chord, if you will, which enables you to find that common humanity on which you can have then a real conversation about these wonderful challenges and possibilities that are ahead of us. But it's been ready to go.
I love that, Mark, because I have long felt that if you and I have a conversation from the perspective of our business cards, or from the perspective of whatever title is at the front of our office, we just automatically move into that role, and there's going to be very little common ground between us. Whereas if you and I have a conversation where we both make a true effort to reach down into our humanity and see the humanity in the other person and touch that humanity and realize, bottom line, forget the business cards, forget the titles in front of the office, we're all human. Yes, we play different roles, but we're all human. And we have a common destiny here that we have to protect. And as long as we understand that, the commonality of our humanity, that puts us in a very different space to have a conversation then about the different ways in which we see that. But starting from the common ground of our humanity, of our shared humanity.
Absolutely. So, Christiana, it's been a wonderful conversation, a very rich conversation. I'd like to perhaps bring it towards its close by asking you to really take up this widow. Can you just show us for a moment that beautiful Ponanda, which I'm delighted that got to you all the way in Costa Rica? Normally, I would come across the planet and schlep it to you.
I'm very proud of it.
Let's bring it back to Aotearoa, New Zealand. As you mentioned, we have a transformative Prime Minister. She has an extraordinary mandate. She has the wonderful support of the Greens, so on and so forth. What is your challenge to this administration at this time? How much can they do, and how fast should they do it?
Well, I think the new commitment of carbon neutrality by 2025 is truly admirable. It is a stretch target by any scope of the imagination. And I'm sure there is going to be a lot of criticism of it. But honestly, if we don't dream big, we don't do the big things. And so this is a big dream, a big target. It is a stretch target. And I have no doubt that New Zealanders will ultimately rally around rally around her to be able to deliver that. And let me say, I don't think that New Zealand's responsibility ends there. I think having the kind of leadership that you do and the understanding of the broad citizenry about climate change issues, I think there is a huge role for New Zealand in the international space. One that New Zealand has never shied away from and should definitely not shy away from now. If ever there was a need for New Zealand to punch above its weight, this is the moment to do so. In the lead up to COP26, we're going to need every single brave leader and every single brave country to show the others how this is done and to offer a hand of solidarity and of mutual collaboration to other countries that are finding it more difficult. So I have huge expectations for New Zealand, both domestically and international. And I'm sure I'm not going to be disappointed.
That's wonderful. Final question, Christiana, a cheeky one for you personally. Put yourself in 2030. Much of the wonderful vision and tangible pathway to getting there is in this wonderful book, which every participant this evening has in front of them. Where's Christiana herself in 2030?
Well, I will still be here in Costa Rica because I have now moved my residence back home to the wild and wonderful Costa Rica. So physically, I shall be here. But I will be in a space of deep gratitude and deep admiration for the transformation that we will all be witnessing over the next 10 years, minus 11 months, over the next 9 years at this point. It is really quite remarkable what is already happening at the corporate level, at the investment level, at the government level. My sense is that we are still just at the bottom of the hockey stick, just beginning to understand that change in the 21st century is not linear, it's not gradual, it's not marginal, it is exponential. And that is something that honestly, we were not educated to understand. We still have a hard time to wrap our brains around exponential change. Those who work in the telecoms industry understand exponential, but the rest of us don't. The rest of us don't because we have not experienced it. But we're going to be experiencing exponential change in the power sector, in the transport sector, in the investment sector, in the agricultural sector, in the smart grid sector, everything to do with transport and distribution of power, in addition to generation. It is going to be, such a multifaceted, exponential, compressed time for just mind-blowing transformations that it is going to be very exciting. It's probably going to be dizzying for most people because we won't be able to deal with all the changes at the same time, but we will arrive at 2030 having stood up to the challenge of cutting our emissions by 50%. And we will all feel so much better for it because we will feel finally we have put the world on track toward a better world. From then on, Mark, you and I will have to turn over the baton to much younger people, but we better not turn over the baton until we are on the right course. They will still have many challenges in front of them, but it is our responsibility to change the trajectory of emissions toward bending the curve, and then turn over the baton to their much fresher and much more intelligent brains so that they can finish the job.
That's wonderful. Yes, I agree with you. I am in fact in that process right now, but yes, we will stay in the paddock alongside these wonderful young talents, Christiana. That's wonderful. Look, thank you so much for your contribution tonight, and thank you,
Mark, and thank you to the Hillary Institute.
Also to the Auckland business audience a couple of weeks ago, which was wonderful. And we look forward to this journey with you, which of course is only in its early stages, and talking with you a lot further as we embark on this journey together. Thank you so much, Christiana. It's been
thank you.
Bye. Well. Bye now.